The sun was too bright for a funeral. It felt like a mockery. The heat pressed down on the cemetery. Thick and suffocating, I sat in the front row. A wall of black lace and calculated silence. In front of me sat a mahogany casket. Inside was Thomas, my husband, the man who had built a kingdom from nothing. The man who, for 20 years, I believed was my soulmate. The priest spoke of legacy. He spoke of a man who was a pillar of the community. A visionary, and a devoted husband. I listened to the lies and felt nothing but the weight of the document folded in my clutch. It wasn't the will. It was a private investigator's report. $28 million. That was the number everyone was thinking about. The cousins I hadn't seen in a decade were there, wiping away fake tears. The business partners were already checking their watches, calculating how the shares would be redistributed. They all saw a grieving widow. They saw a woman who was about to inherit a fortune and likely lose her mind in the process. They were wrong. I didn't look at the casket. I looked at the back row. Under the shade of a large oak tree stood a woman. She was young, maybe 28. She wore a simple navy dress, not black. Next to her was a boy, no older than 7. He was kicking at the grass, looking bored. But when he looked up, my heart stopped. He had Thomas's eyes, the same piercing, icy blue, the same stubborn set of the jaw. I had known for 3 days. Thomas had died of a sudden heart attack in his office. While I was at the hospital, his phone had buzzed incessantly. One message caught my eye. It wasn't from a client. It was from a contact saved only as home too. The message was simple. The boy has a fever. Are you coming tonight? I didn't scream. I didn't smash the phone. I sat in that cold hospital waiting room and I began to plan. Silence was my only weapon. If I spoke now, the lawyers would freeze the accounts. The lawsuits would begin. The $28 million would be bled dry by legal fees before I could touch a cent. The service ended. People lined up to offer their condolences. I shook hands. I nodded. I played the part of the broken woman perfectly. When the woman in navy approached, the air around us seemed to turn to ice. She looked at me with a mixture of guilt and defiance. She leaned in, her voice a jagged whisper. "I'm so sorry for your loss," she said. I looked her straight in the eyes. I didn't blink. I didn't recoil. "Thank you for coming," I replied. "It's always nice to see a new face." She paled. She knew that I knew. She grabbed the boy's hand and hurried toward the parking lot. I watched them go. My husband had built a second life, a second family, a second home, and he had used my life, my support, and my silence to fund it all. The $28 million wasn't just an inheritance anymore. It was a debt, and I was going to collect every single cent. The mahogany table in the law firm's conference room was long enough to be a runway. At the head sat Marcus, Thomas's longtime attorney and the only man Thomas truly trusted, or so he thought. Marcus cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. He looked at me with a patronizing softness. "Evelyn," he began, "Thomas was a complex man, but he wanted to ensure you were taken care of." I sat perfectly still. My hands were folded on the table. No trembling, no tears. I wanted to see how far this lie went. "The will is straightforward," Marcus continued. "The estate is valued at roughly $28 million, after taxes and minor bequests. The bulk of the liquid assets and the real estate holdings are left to you. However, there is a codicil." A codicil. The word hung in the air like a bad smell. "Thomas added a provision 6 months ago," Marcus said, sliding a paper toward me. "He established a trust, $10 million. It's set aside for a specific beneficiary, a minor." I didn't need to read the name. I already knew it. Leo, the boy with the icy blue eyes. The room was silent. Marcus was waiting for the explosion. He was waiting for me to ask who this child was. He was waiting for me to demand an explanation for why my husband was giving a third of our life's work to a stranger. I picked up the paper. I read it slowly. I even smiled a little. 6 months ago, I said softly, "That's interesting." Marcus blinked. You aren't surprised?" I leaned forward. "Marcus, I've spent 20 years being the wife of a man who played chess while everyone else played checkers. Do you really think I didn't know what game he was playing?" It was a bluff. A massive, dangerous bluff. But it worked. Marcus looked relieved. He thought I was in on it. He thought I was the cool wife who accepted the mistress and the secret child for the sake of the empire. The truth was far more lethal. By pretending to know, I had gained access to the information Marcus was supposed to hide. "Where is she staying?" I asked, my voice casual, as if I were asking about the weather. "The townhouse on Willow Creek." Marcus replied automatically. Thomas bought it under the LLC name, Clearwater Holdings. Clearwater. I had seen that name on our tax returns for years. I thought it was a real estate investment. It was. He was investing in a life that didn't include me. I stood up, smoothing my skirt. "Thank you, Marcus. I think we're done for today." "But Evelyn, the trust. We need to finalize the transfer of the first installment." Marcus stammered. I reached the door and turned back. My smile didn't reach my eyes. "Tell the woman at Willow Creek that I'll be stopping by this evening. We have a lot to discuss." "And Marcus? Don't bother calling her to warn her. If you do, I'll start asking questions about those offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands that Thomas mentioned in his private journals." Marcus turned the color of ash. He didn't know about any journals, because they didn't exist, but he knew about the accounts. I walked out of the office and into the bright afternoon sun. The $28 million was mine. The house was mine, and the truth was finally coming home. The house on Willow Creek was beautiful. It was a sun-drenched colonial with white shutters and a perfectly manicured lawn. It was the kind of house Thomas and I used to dream about before we became too successful for modest dreams. I stood at the front door and didn't knock. I pushed it open. The woman, Sarah, was in the kitchen. She was pouring juice for the boy. When she saw me, the glass slipped from her hand. It shattered on the hardwood floor. The boy stared at the red liquid spreading like a wound. "Go to your room, Leo," Sarah said. Her voice was trembling. The boy looked at me, then at his mother, and ran. We were alone. The silence in the kitchen was heavy with the scent of orange juice and expensive candles. "How did you find us?" she asked. She wasn't defiant anymore. She looked exhausted. I sat down at her kitchen table. It was the same brand as the one in my house. Thomas had no imagination. He simply bought 2 of everything. 2 sets of jewelry, 2 cars, 2 lives. "The lawyers told me," I said. "They told me about the $10 million. Sarah let out a bitter, hollow laugh. "10 million? Evelyn, look around. Does this look like the home of someone with $10 million? I frowned. The house was nice, but it wasn't a mansion. "What are you talking about?" "Thomas didn't leave us a trust fund," she whispered, leaning against the counter for support. "He stopped paying the mortgage 4 months ago. We're being evicted next week. He told me he was moving the money into a private account for our future. He said it was for protection." I felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. If Thomas hadn't put the money in a trust for them, and it wasn't in our joint accounts, then Marcus was lying. The $10 million codicil wasn't a gift for a secret son. It was a smokescreen. I drove back to the city in a trance. The rhythmic hum of the tires on the pavement felt like a countdown. Thomas hadn't been playing chess. He had been a pawn. I didn't go home. I went back to Thomas's private office in the city. I had the key he thought I never knew about. The air inside was stale, smelling of old paper and expensive scotch. I turned on the desk lamp and began to tear the place apart. I didn't look for bank statements. I looked for the things Thomas used to hide his real self. Behind a framed photo of our wedding day, I found a small floor safe. The code was my birthday. He was always sentimental when he was being a snake. Inside weren't stacks of cash. There was a single ledger and a USB drive. I plugged the drive into his laptop. Files flashed across the screen. Transfers, offshore routings, names of shell companies I didn't recognize. But one name appeared over and over again: MV Legal Holdings. Marcus. The $28 million wasn't just sitting in a bank waiting for me to sign a paper. Thomas had been laundering money for his business partners. And Marcus was the architect. The inheritance was a pile of dirty money that the federal government was likely already tracking. Thomas hadn't died of a heart attack because of stress. He had died because he was about to get caught. And Marcus wasn't trying to help me inherit a fortune, he was trying to use me to sign the final documents that would transfer the liability to my name. The $10 million trust fund wasn't for the boy. It was Marcus's exit fee. He was planning to take the money and leave me to face the prison time for Thomas's crimes. I looked at the ledger. My name was forged on dozens of documents. I wasn't just a widow. In the eyes of the law, I was a co-conspirator. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes. They thought I was the grieving wife. They thought Sarah was the desperate mistress. They expected us to fight each other while they ran off with the gold. I picked up the phone. I didn't call the police. I didn't call a new lawyer. I called the woman at Willow Creek. "Sarah," I said when she answered. "Pack a bag for you and Leo. We're going to need to move fast if we want to stay out of a cage." Is the story getting more intense for you? Should I move on to the next parts? The rain began to fall when Sarah arrived. It was a cold, gray drizzle that blurred the world. We met at an old motel on the edge of the county. Somewhere Marcus wouldn't look. Somewhere Thomas never went. Sarah was terrified. I could see it in the way she gripped her son's hand. He was just a boy. A boy with Thomas's eyes and none of his sins. We sat in a room that smelled of stale smoke and bleach. I laid out the ledger. I showed her the names. She recognized them. They weren't just business partners. They were ghosts from Thomas's past. Men he had stepped on to climb the ladder. And now, they were reaching up to pull us down into the grave with him. Sarah told me the truth about their final night together. Thomas hadn't died at his office. He had died in her arms at the Willow Creek house. She was panicked. She called Marcus before she called the ambulance. Marcus told her to leave. He told her he would handle everything. He moved the body. He staged the scene at the office. He made it look like a tragic heart attack of a hard-working mogul. But the medical report I held in my hand said something else. There were traces of something in his system. Not a heart attack, a chemical shutdown. Marcus didn't just want the money. He wanted the silence. He had killed the man who was his golden goose because the goose was about to start squawking to the authorities. And now, we were the only two people left who knew the timeline was a lie. We were the loose ends. The next morning, I returned to the mansion. I walked through the halls that felt like a museum of a life I never really lived. I called Marcus. I made my voice small. I made it break. "Marcus," I whispered into the phone. "I'm at the house. I found something. I found the ledger." The silence on the other end was absolute. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. "Where is it, Evelyn?" he asked. His voice was smooth, but there was a sharp edge underneath. "It's in the library," I said, "behind the false shelf Thomas used for his scotch. There are names here. Marcus, your name is here. What does this mean?" "Stay there," he said. "Don't touch anything. Don't call anyone. I'm coming over right now. We'll fix this together." I hung up the phone and looked at the clock. I had 20 minutes. I didn't go to the library. I went to the security room. Thomas had spent millions on a state-of-the-art surveillance system. He liked to watch his kingdom. He liked to know what the servants were doing. He liked to know when I came and went. I began to pull the footage from the night he died. I watched the screen. The driveway was empty. Then, at 2 a.m., a black sedan pulled in. A man got out. He was carrying something heavy. A body. Marcus lugged Thomas's limp form through the side entrance. He was sweating. He was struggling. He stayed for 40 minutes. When he left, he was carrying a briefcase. The briefcase that contained the real will. The one that didn't have a $10 million codicil for a secret son. The one that left everything to a charity Marcus controlled. I copied the files onto 3 different drives. I sent one to an offshore cloud server. I put one in my pocket. The third, I left in the computer, waiting for him to find it. I heard the gravel crunch in the driveway. The predator had arrived, but he didn't know the sheep had grown teeth. I sat in the high-backed leather chair in the library, the ledger open on my lap. I poured a glass of Thomas's most expensive scotch. I waited. The door swung open. Marcus didn't look like a lawyer anymore. He looked like a man who had run out of time. He didn't say hello. He didn't offer condolences. He walked straight to the desk. "Give it to me, Evelyn," he said, reaching for the ledger. I pulled it back. "Not yet, Marcus. We need to talk about Willow Creek. We need to talk about why my husband died in a bed that wasn't mine. And why you were the one who moved him." Marcus froze. His face went pale, then a dark, bruised purple. "You've been busy," he sneered. "I've been a widow," I replied. "It gives one a lot of time to think." "You killed him, didn't you? You realized he was going to turn state's witness to save his own skin. And you couldn't let that happen." Marcus laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. Thomas was a liability. He was weak. He wanted to confess because he felt guilty about the boy. He wanted to give them a clean life. I couldn't let him ruin 20 years of work for a mistress and a brat. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over me. "And now you're a liability too, Evelyn. But don't worry, the world will believe you couldn't handle the grief. A tragic accident in the Grand Library. A widow joined with her husband. It's almost poetic." He reached into his jacket. He didn't pull out a pen. He pulled out a syringe. I didn't move. I didn't scream. I just pointed to the small, blinking red light hidden in the bookshelf. "Smile, Marcus," I said. "You're live on the internet. Sarah is watching. The police are watching. And the $28 million you wanted so badly? It's already gone. I transferred it to a blind trust for Leo 10 minutes ago. You're killing me for an empty bank account." Marcus looked at the blinking red light. The syringe trembled in his hand. He looked at the camera, then back at me. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He knew he was caught. He knew the world was watching him become a monster in high definition. The silence was broken by the distant wail of sirens. They were coming. Sarah had done her part. She had called the authorities the moment the stream went live. Marcus lunged. He didn't care about the camera anymore. He didn't care about the law. He wanted me dead. He was a cornered animal. And I was the person who had closed the cage. I dodged the desk and scrambled toward the door. The leather chair flipped over with a heavy thud. Marcus was fast, but he was frantic. He tripped over the rug, the syringe skittering across the polished floor. I didn't run out. I stopped. I stood by the window and watched him crawl for the poison. "It's over, Marcus," I said. "Look at yourself. You were the smartest man in the room for 30 years. Now you're crawling on the floor like a dog." He looked up at me, his eyes wild. "You think you've won?" He spat. "That money is blood. It's cursed. You'll never spend a dime of it without looking over your shoulder. The people Thomas worked with, they don't care about live streams. They care about their bottom line." "I know," I said. "That's why the money isn't in a bank. It's in a ghost account. It's fragmented. It's gone into 1,000 different directions. If they want it, they'll have to find it. And if they find it, they'll find your signature on every single transaction." The sirens were louder now. Blue and red lights began to dance against the library walls. The police were storming the front gates. Marcus slumped against the desk. The fight left him. He knew the game was up. He looked at the ledger, the evidence of his betrayal, and he started to cry. It wasn't out of regret. It was out of the sheer, pathetic realization that he had lost everything for a fortune he would never touch. The doors burst open. Armed officers flooded the room. They saw the syringe. They saw the ledger. They saw me, the widow, standing in the shadows of the empire my husband had built on lies. Take him, I said quietly. He has a lot to tell you about how Thomas really died. 1 month later. The mansion was sold. Every piece of furniture, every gold-plated fixture, every memory was auctioned off. The proceeds didn't go to me. They went to the victims of Thomas's financial schemes. It was the only way to wash the blood off the walls. I stood on the porch of the house on Willow Creek. It was early morning. The air was crisp and smelled of rain. Sarah came out with 2 mugs of coffee. She looked different. The fear was gone. Her eyes were clear. Leo was in the yard, chasing a dog we had adopted a week ago. He looked happy. He looked like a child who didn't know the weight of the name he carried. How much is left? Sarah asked, leaning against the railing. I looked at my phone. The hidden account, the one Marcus didn't find, was still there. It wasn't $28 million. It wasn't even $10 million. After the lawyers, the settlements, and the quiet payments to keep the partners away, there was exactly $1 million left. Enough to start over, I said. Enough to make sure he never has to be like his father. Sarah nodded. We had formed an alliance born of betrayal. We weren't friends, not yet, but we were survivors. We were the 2 women Thomas thought he could control from the grave. I had been the silent wife. She had been the hidden mistress. Now, we were just 2 women who owned their own lives. I thought about Thomas. I thought about the $28 million inheritance and the lies that came with it. People think money is the goal. They think the fortune is the prize. They're wrong. The prize is the moment you realize you don't need the money to be powerful. The prize is the silence of a morning where no one is lying to you. I took a sip of my coffee and watched the sun rise over the trees. The kingdom was gone. The empire had crumbled, but for the first time in 20 years, I was finally awake. I turned to Sarah. Let's go inside, I said. We have a lot of work to do. The past was buried. The future was ours to write. And this time, we were holding the pen. The peace of Willow Creek was a fragile thing. It lasted exactly 3 months. We had fallen into a rhythm. Coffee at dawn, Leo at school, work in the afternoon. It was a simple life. A quiet life. A life that didn't require a mask. But the past doesn't stay buried just because you stop looking at the grave. It happened on a Tuesday. The air was heavy with the scent of coming rain. I was sitting on the porch when a black SUV pulled into the driveway. It didn't belong to a neighbor. It didn't belong to the police. 2 men stepped out. They didn't wear uniforms. They wore suits that cost more than my first house. The man in the lead was older. His hair was silver. His eyes like flint. I recognized him from the ledger. Julian Vane, the man Thomas feared most. The man who sat at the very top of the pyramid. Evelyn, he said. He didn't wait for an invitation. He walked up the steps and stood too close. You've done a remarkable job of cleaning up Thomas's mess. I didn't stand up. I didn't let my hands shake. I have no more mess to clean. Julian, the money is gone. The accounts are closed. He smiled. It was a cold, empty gesture. The money was never the point. Thomas was a collector of secrets. He kept a digital key. A key that opens doors my associates prefer to keep locked. Marcus didn't have it. Sarah doesn't have it. Which means it's here. I looked past him. Sarah was at the window. Her face was a ghost. She knew who this man was. She knew that Marcus was just a puppet. And this was the man pulling the strings. I don't know what you're talking about, I said. Julian leaned in. His voice dropped to a whisper. Don't play the grieving widow with me. You're the one who outplayed Marcus. You're the one who moved $28 million through a ghost network in 10 minutes. Give me the key, and you keep your $1 million. You keep this house. You keep the boy. And if I don't? Julian looked at the yard. He looked at the dog. Then he looked at Leo's bicycle leaning against the porch. Accidents happen to families every day. Evelyn, especially families that don't exist on paper. They gave me 24 hours. One day to hand over a key I didn't even know I had. When the SUV pulled away, Sarah came out. She was hyperventilating. We have to run, she said. We can take the car. We can go to the border. No, I said. We run. And he hunts us forever. Julian Vane doesn't stop. Thomas told me once that the only way to stop a man like Julian is to make the cost of his victory higher than the value of his life. I went to the basement. I pulled out the single item I hadn't sold. Thomas's old watch collection. He was obsessed with them. Mechanical masterpieces. I took the heaviest one. A gold chronograph he wore to every board meeting. I took a jeweler's screwdriver and opened the back. Nothing. I opened the next. Nothing. On the fifth watch. A Patek Philippe. I found it. A micro SD card smaller than a fingernail. I didn't put it in a computer. I didn't need to see what was on it. If Julian wanted it this badly, it was the end of his world. I called Marcus. He was sitting in a county jail cell, waiting for a trial that would never come if Julian got to him first. Marcus, I said when the collect call connected, I have the key, and I'm going to give it to Julian, unless you tell me exactly how to kill him. Marcus let out a ragged breath. He's already dead, Evelyn. He just doesn't know it yet. Look at the file labeled Mercury. I hung up and went to the computer. I inserted the card. The file was a map. Not of banks. Not of accounts. It was a map of a private cemetery in upstate New York. A place where Julian Vane's problems went to sleep. There were names, dates, coordinates. It wasn't just a secret. It was a graveyard of the elite. I didn't call the police. I didn't call Julian. I called a journalist I had known for a decade. A woman who lived for the story that would burn the world down. Then, I went to meet Julian. We met at the docks. The wind was whipping the water into white peaks. Julian stood by the edge of the pier, his shadow long and jagged. Do you have it? He asked. I held up the card. It's all here, Julian. Every name, every coordinate, the Mercury file. He reached for it, but I stepped back. I'm not giving it to you, Julian. I've already sent a copy to every major news outlet in the country. It's set on a dead man's switch. If I don't enter a code every 2 hours, the servers go live. Julian's face went still. You're bluffing. Try me, I said. You can kill me right now. You can kill Sarah. You can even kill the boy. But by tomorrow morning, the entire world will know where the bodies are buried. You won't just go to prison. The people you work for will tear you apart to save themselves. The silence lasted for an eternity. The only sound was the waves crashing against the wood. Julian Vane, the man who owned the pyramid, looked at me and saw his own end. What do you want? He hissed. I want the $28 million back. I said, not for me, for the families, and I want a signed confession for the murder of my husband. Julian laughed. You think I'll give you that? I held out my phone. It was already recording. The timer on the dead man's switch was ticking. 5 minutes left. Julian, make a choice. Do you want to be a ghost? Or do you want to be a headline? He looked at the card. He looked at me, and for the first time in the history of the $28 million lie, the truth won. Julian spoke. He confessed. He gave up the names. He gave up the money. He thought he was buying his life. He was wrong. The moment the recording ended, I hit send. The dead man's switch was a lie. I had already released it all. I walked away as the first police sirens began to scream in the distance. Julian Vane was standing on the pier, a broken king in a dying empire. I went back to Willow Creek. I sat on the porch. I watched the rain finally start to fall. The inheritance wasn't the money. It wasn't the house. It was the power to walk away from the fire without getting burned. I looked at Sarah. I looked at Leo. It's over, I said. And this time, I meant it. The headlines were explosive. The Mercury file tore through the Capitol like a wildfire. Julian Vane was arrested in the middle of the night, dragged from his penthouse in handcuffs. The world saw a hero in me. They saw a widow who had taken down a titan. The $28 million was being redistributed. The confession was playing on every news loop. And for a moment, the air felt clean. Sarah and I stayed at Willow Creek. We didn't talk much. We watched Leo play in the yard. We watched the sunset. We waited for the feeling of safety to finally settle in our bones. But safety is a ghost. It haunts you with the memory of what you lost. And it never quite touches you. I was sitting in the study, looking at the bank records of the ghost accounts I had used to trap Julian. I was closing them one by one, erasing the digital footprints. My finger hovered over the final account, the one containing the last $1 million. Then, the screen flickered. A new window opened. It wasn't a bank statement. It was a live feed. The camera was low to the ground. It was moving through grass. It was moving toward a house. I recognized the porch. I recognized the white shutters. I recognized the bicycle leaning against the railing. It was a live feed of the house we were sitting in. I stood up, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked out the window. The yard was empty. Leo was gone. Sarah was gone. The silence of the house suddenly felt like a tomb. I ran outside, screaming their names. The wind was the only thing that answered. The dog was sitting by the edge of the woods, whining, his tail tucked between his legs. I looked down at the porch. There, lying on the exact spot where Julian Vane had stood, was a single gold watch. A Patek Philippe, the same one I had opened to find the micro SD card. But this one was ticking, and the back was already open. Inside the watch casing, there was no SD card. There was a small, handwritten note. The $28 million wasn't the inheritance. Evelyn, it was the bait. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from an unknown number. No words, just a video file. I opened it with trembling hands. The video started with Thomas. He was sitting in a chair I didn't recognize. He looked tired, but he was alive. His eyes weren't icy anymore. They were filled with a terrifying, calm clarity. Evelyn, he said, if you're seeing this, you've already won. You've taken down Julian. You've leaked the files. You've played the game perfectly. Just like I trained you to. He leaned forward, his face filling the screen. But you forgot one thing. Evelyn, in a game of chess, the queen is the most powerful piece. But the king never stays dead if the board is still standing. The $28 million wasn't stolen from the associates. It was stolen for you, to see if you were strong enough to protect it, to see if you were worthy of what comes next. The video cut to a different room, a dark room. Sarah and Leo were sitting on a couch. They weren't tied up. They weren't crying. Leo was eating an apple. Sarah was looking at the camera with a smile that made my blood turn to ice. It wasn't a smile of fear. It was a smile of recognition. Mommy, Leo said, looking off camera, when is Daddy coming home? The front door of the Willow Creek house creaked open behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't move. The scent of Thomas's expensive scotch and the faint smell of the cigars he used to smoke filled the air. A hand reached over my shoulder. A hand I had held for 20 years. A hand with a matching gold wedding band. He leaned in, his breath warm against my ear. His voice a jagged whisper that shattered the world I thought I had saved.
Hello, Evelyn. Did you enjoy the funeral?